Welcome back to our weekly seminar series. I'm Angie from New Ventures BC. I'm here with Liz, who helps me here behind the scenes. And this week's topic is on HR 101. And we are lucky to have from Answer Bar, Allison, Guld, and Stephanie Lyster. So they will be taking you through all things to consider in the HR world as a startup. And we always leave lots of time for questions. So please feel free to ask away once the time comes. So first, let's go through some general housekeeping. So we're heading into the home stretch of our annual series here. Next week, we actually have 2 seminars, so Wednesday and Thursday, all around financing on Wednesday, and then specific to shred claims Thursday for those who want to kind of go deep on that topic. And I think I've mentioned before, New Ventures BC, we are here to help BC tech startups. We're a nonprofit. We are, of course, the competition, which many of you are coming to us from. And we also have a year-round accelerator mentorship program. And for in-revenue companies, we are taking applications for our sales accelerator up until May 24th this month. So any questions around those, feel free to reach out. Some community events coming up, just so you've got a few things to put on your calendar. Today, Vantech, which is a well-known angel network here in town, they're sponsors of ours too, but they're having a social. So if you're looking for some in-person interaction, go check that one out. It's happening later today. And I'll also point to we run the events in partnership with the Vancouver Entrepreneurs Forum, VEF. So their next event is their May Forum next Tuesday on blockchain. Please do join us for that. And if you are a blockchain related startup, we are looking for lightning pitch companies still. So those are 100-second pitches for you to pitch in front of our in-person and virtual audience. So if that's of interest, I think Liz is going to put a link to the pitch application as well. Okay, so all the video and slides for these events are on our website, newventuresbc.com. If you go to the top of our site, you'll see a seminars button. You can push that, click that, and it'll take you right there to everything. And I'm going to thank my sponsors who help us deliver all this programming to you. And then I will swap slide decks and introduce Steph and Allison. So our lead partner title sponsor is Innovate BC. Gold sponsors EY, Fasken, SFU Beauty School of Business, and the UBC Sauder School of Business. Our silver sponsors Ace Tech, TELUS Ventures, Output, Vantech Angel Network, and Volition. And we also have great bronze sponsors who are ecosystem partners here working with startups, along with our media sponsors. And if you want to get in touch, that is how. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of this presentation and swap to the next one. So while I'm doing that, I'll just say hello to Allison and Steph. Liz, if maybe you have a moment to spotlight them right now, that would be great while I am getting the slide deck ready. So Allison and Steph have given this HR 101 talk for quite a few years now, actually. And it's always a super great overview, things to consider. Lots of great Q&A, so looking forward to another good one today. So let me share their slide deck here. I get to drive today. All right, that should be up there. So Steph and Allison are from Answer Bar, which we've excuse me, I've certainly used over the years. It's a great online resource for getting your HR questions answered, and you get expertise of Allison and Steph behind it. So I'm going to pass it over to them to walk you through all this. So welcome and thanks again.
Hi everybody. Thanks very much for coming out and listening to us. Steph and I are super excited to be back. As Angie said, we have presented over the last 5 years. 5, Steph? 4 or 5?
I think it's 5. But
yeah. And so our format is that we're going to provide you as much information as we can in a short period of time. Please feel free to ask questions as we go, and you can do that through chat. And Liz, go ahead and interrupt us. We'll pause and ask you, but if there's somebody who's got a question at a slide, don't hesitate to interrupt us. And it's going to take about an hour, and we've got some time afterwards for questions. So next slide. Oh, this is what I can't see because I'm looking at something else.
So I can see it if you want. There it is. You want
Yeah,
me to go through it? So this is our agenda. So and we work loosely because we don't know exactly where everybody's at. And so we try to tailor this content to what people are most interested in learning about. But our general format is we start and do an overview of HR admin. We briefly touch on workforce planning for early stage companies. We touch on recruiting, which we know is always an ever increasing a popular topic. How to properly onboard your team as you start to hire, and how to terminate properly when you need to exit people. So it's a little bit full cycle, getting prepared to hire, while you manage, and when you exit.
perfect. So next slide. HR admin is our first starting point. Boring, but definitely necessary. Next slide. And so for the boring stuff, we've got a couple of points. CRA expects you to log in, sign up, and register for payroll, and you have to do it on a regular pay period basis. So when you get employees and you start up your payroll, you have to pick a pay period. Most companies pick either twice a month, so on the 15th and the 31st, or some people pick every 2 weeks. So one's called a 24 pay period and one's called a 26. You register for that, you let CRA know, and then you submit your deductions online through CRA. Super easy, and it's super easy to do that, but you have to register. And let me tell you that if you happen to miss a payment by a day, the penalties are shocking. So we did that once. We paid and registered, we filed, and then we forgot to pay. And you don't want to do that. Just let me tell you from experience. We do have a handout if anybody's interested. So you can either reach out to us through answer bar at the end. We've got a whole bunch of templates and tip sheets and checklists that we are happy to share with anybody who participates in this workshop. Just log in. Steph, do you want me to do this now?
Yeah, just go, you know what, let's cover it at the end. But point being, as we go through this, you'll hear us mention, as Allison said, we have, I think we mentioned it, about 6 different things that we can send you in relation to some of the content in here. And then we'll tell you how to get it at the end. Why don't we do that?
Perfect. So for payroll processing, there are lots of services out there. We've got a number that we've worked with that we can recommend. There's always new ones coming up. If you've got more than a few employees, it certainly saves you time and usually leads to better accuracy. But you can do your payroll manually. There are no rules. You can do it through a spreadsheet or you can do it through a service. But if you're interested and you don't want to spend the time, or you don't have an accountant to do it for you, then I would get a service to do it. When I was talking about your CRA payroll, you probably all have a GST registration or your business number, and you go in and set it up through that same area in CRA.
And we can walk you through, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, which we do often. And we can walk you through that. It can be as simple as, okay, what are the steps that I need to take when I log into the website? All these sort of things, if you make a note, we can always help you do that. We make it sound easy, and it is easy, but sometimes it's easy to walk through.
Yeah. Pay statements are kind of interesting. Lots of people don't realize that there are rules around them. There's a standard template that you set up when you use a service, or that you should set up, and you can start with a basic one and then grow from there depending on your organization. But the most important thing that we want to highlight here is that on your pay stub, you should indicate your vacation balance. If you have a vacation policy, that is required on pay stubs. And you should send all pay stubs to your employees' personal emails, because at the point in time that you terminate them at some point in the future, and you don't have it set up to send payroll to that for that last pay stub, then you run into some problems. You have to print it, you have to figure it out, blah, blah, blah. Just send pay stubs to their personal emails, and then there's no argument that they have it and they can access it anytime, because that's one of the rules around payroll. WorkSafe BC, again, you need to register as soon as you have employees. Easy to do, follow the instructions online. It's called the employer's registration application form. The cost for WorkSafe BC is minimal each year. I think we pay maybe $40. It depends on your payroll. So early on, you'll find it's quite reasonable. Based on your industry, you're given a rate. If you're in tech, I think it went up to 1.9 this year. And last year, the last few years, it was 1.7. So we pay about $40 a year. It's not a big cost, but you are required to register. And that will cover all of your employees and any contractors who are on site with you, but you should or could ask your contractors if they have their own WorkSafe, so that minimizes some of your issues.
No, there's one question on WorkSafe from Sumner. Can I do a POP letter with WCB if I am still the only employee? Does that work in this industry? Yes. Okay.
Yes. BC health tax. Steph, do you want to do this one?
Sure.
It's new. It's kind of new.
Yeah. It is new. That's why I'm like, exactly. So the good news is, well, it depends on your revenues. That's how it came into play. So if you have revenues above 500,000 per year, then you must register. It's mandatory now online, and you register through eTax BC. And it's the BC employer health tax. And so we have the link to that. And it all sort of, that was sort of the starting, and then the extension, which we saw today, which was the new sick leave rules that came in January 2022. So it's all that's an extension of this employer financial responsibility for employees' health and wellness. So what we have it here for the new sick leave that came live this January. We've always had 3 unpaid mandatory sick days that employees, you have to hold their job. You have to let them take 3 days unpaid. And now on top of that, you have 5 paid days for all employees, whether they're part-time or full-time, and regardless of when they start, per year. They don't roll over and they don't get paid out. But they are mandatory for all employers.
Right. And then the last thing, we want to just remind everybody that if you do have employees, you should be aware, at minimum be aware, that there are Employment Standards Acts for all provinces, and they vary in name. Alberta is the Alberta Employment Code, Ontario is the Employment Standards Act, I think there. BC is the Employment Standards Act. Basically, they give the rules that employers and employees need to understand in the workplace, and they do not apply for anybody who is federally, is working in a federal environment or a unionized environment. But hopefully none of you end up in any kind of a union environment, but employment standards is your base minimum, and then everything goes up from there. But it's super important to understand that it exists. Again, we know it inside out, so we get questions. There's also ways to interpret the questions depending on your interest in the industry. But it's a good thing to go and look at. You can look at it online these days, and it's easily accessible.
Yeah, it's a bit of a read. So, and Allison's right. That drives a lot of questions. We have questions that come in 2 different ways. One is around employment standards and what do I have to do? And the other side is, this situation happened, how should I handle it? And majority of questions come into those 2. So if you don't want to read it, you can just ask us.
Yeah. And you used to be able to, as an employer, just call the employment standards employer line. And I've used it over the years extensively. And recently, wow, the people on the other end of the line, like, I don't know how they tied their shoes and got to work in the morning, like, not helpful and not good. So,
and yeah, with zero disrespect, something's altered for sure on there, from time to get a reply, and what actually comes back seems, to Allison's point, lacks some accuracy and a lot of ambiguity. So just keep that in mind when you call. Like, yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah. Oh, a quick question here. We usually ask this at the beginning. How many, and I don't know if you can just raise your hand. How many people have employees? Are we able to see that, Liz? Or roughly?
We see hands, or we can maybe do a poll. Just
Yeah, either way, we'll keep going, but it's good to know.
Yeah, does anybody have an employee?
Yeah, like no one has an employee, then we'll do things in a different, we can tailor information. So we usually ask that at the beginning. And it can be if you have employees but if you plan to hire in the next year, that's also fairly critical. So we'll keep going and then we'll circle back to this. And as Allison mentioned, this admin part, this is, we start with the boring and then we, end with the exciting.
It's
So good.
juicy.
Exactly.
So employee files, if you have an employee, you are required under employment standards to have a record of that employment, and you are required to keep it for 4 years.
Used to be 7, right?
At least 2, and I think it's 4. And employees files are accessible to your employees. So if you have an employee file and you want to keep some performance notes, you might want to keep those in a separate file, because if your employee asks to see their employee file, they can. So typically in an employee file, you want your employment agreement or your offer letter, whatever you've chosen to do, any onboarding forms to make sure you know what they were given in particular from company property and equipment, copy of their resume, ongoing performance conversations, goals, performance review documents, and then any essential signed policies that you have. Generally, although you can choose to do this, if you do references or a background check, I would keep those in a separate file that's just called references or background checks. Again, references, your employees have to give them to you and then you do those references, but then they can read them and see them. So good practice to keep those reference documents in a separate file somewhere, and just be aware that employees can ask to see them. I can't remember if we addressed this later, Steph, but regarding references, it's illegal to do what's called a backdoor reference, which means I'm going to go call Bob's uncle who probably worked with Sally who's just applied. You're not supposed to do that. We're not going to say never do it, but generally ask your employees for their reference names and then do those references. And if you happen to be having coffee with someone and a name comes up and they give you some information, well, these things happen. But generally ask your employees for their references.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say too is, yes, so they have access to their employee files, but the truth is, make a decision before you hire people, what kind of employer you're going to be. Realistically, there shouldn't be anything in that the employee file that you haven't talked to them about. If you've got secret notes in there, then you're doing something wrong. So to Allison's point, if there is sensitive information or there's something in, sometimes you end up in some shifty situations where you got to keep things confidential, definitely keep them out until it's been resolved. But as a general rule of practice, nothing should be in there that they don't know about. Have a conversation and make sure that you have that open communication with your employees.
Next slide. The last bullet on the previous slide said essential signed policies. This is becoming more and more prevalent as time passes. So we thought we'd share this. In BC, a bullying and harassment policy is legally required by all organizations that have any employees. You can download a standard template off of WorkSafe BC's website. You could ask us for a standard template. There's nothing exciting about it. It basically sets out what your policy statement should be and then what you do in case there is an incidence of bullying and or harassment and someone raises their hand and says, I don't feel right. And then there's a whole set of steps that you need to go through, and WorkSafety covers all those off. Many companies have a code of conduct, super useful in just setting the tone of your culture, and very useful if people misbehave either within the organization or outside. And if any of you happen to remember the Vancouver riots a few years ago after the hockey playoffs, there was a bunch of people who misbehaved downtown. Some of those people caught on video were charged, and some of those people who were charged were terminated from their companies, but not all. And the reason some were and some won't, for the most part, there's obviously other extenuating circumstances, but generally it's because a company had a code of conduct that said you will represent the company in a manner that is representative of our culture and our code of conduct, etc., at all times. And that applies whether you're at a conference, whether you're picking up customers or supplies or whatever. It doesn't always apply just in the office. And so it's a useful document. Travel and expense, if people travel, always good to have that. There are great apps for tracking expenses now. I would never have an expense form in this day and age. There are many that you can just snap the receipt, take a photo of the receipt and upload it and it's done. So take a look at the apps. They're very reasonably priced. Given COVID, we added this line, work from home policy. If you are now in the either hybrid situation or allowing your employees to work from home, be sure to have a work from home policy and be aware that your employee's home office is an extension of your office. So all health and safety policies and issues and things that come out of WorkSafe BC must apply. So you need to make sure that wherever they're working is ergonomically safe, doesn't have a bookshelf that's going to fall over if the cat jumps on it, all those kinds of things, so that their home office should be a space that is reasonable, in your opinion, for a workspace and safe for them. And then we're also finding it's useful to have a technology and social media use policy. What you can and cannot do either on the company computer or representing the company in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I was just going to interject there and say for the last three, for travel expense, work from home, I mean, the technology, social media is very much an extension of a technological code of conduct, really. And same with the work from home, where you've got your security and data sensitivity issues as well, and also address where work from home is. Is that their home office? Are they working on vacation? Can they change provinces? Can they change countries? That becomes a thing. And it actually became a very prevalent thing that came across our platform was employees requesting to travel and work, and it's quite complicated. So make sure that that's ironed out in there as well. And just to really make the point about an expense policy, it's common to see a line, any expense reasonable. Well, it's really in the details, like true story. And maybe I'm doing it, it's happening, right? And so, here's a real question. It's like my employee expense to call girl. Do I have to pay for it? And you're like, ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Well, truth is, what does your policy say? Maybe you do. Like, does it just say the word entertainment, or to describe what is acceptable entertainment? Like, so it's a bit of a funny way to go around it, but the reality is we have a very extensive travel and expense policy that we hand out for that purpose. It can come down to, can they Uber? Can they Subway? Where do they fly? How much can they tip? And you don't have to be that detailed, but you have to be specific. It is very important to have, otherwise it's open to interpretation and the employer loses, not the employee, okay?
Yeah, and we also, on that note, I mean, seriously, the can I expense the call girl was a real question. And, our flippant answer was, did you approve it? Did you pre-approve it? And if you did, well, you are. Your accounting team will provide you with lots of information around your travel and expense policy. It ties in with HR because people are involved. But generally, I get my CFO or my controller or whoever to draft the travel and expense policy, and then just make sure it catches up with all of the people issues. But as Steph said, we've got a pretty good template, but it all depends on your environment and what you need.
So we have all of these. If you need them, we can send them to you. You can customize them. You can ask us questions about them. Just make sure if you have employees, you have them.
Next slide, Angie.
Workforce planning. So this is our shortest section here because it seems sort of like something that wouldn't exist, for early growth companies, right? So this is, we figure out what roles you need and when you need them, then design them well. And so the reason it's so important for us, in our opinion, to bring this up is that one of the biggest not mistakes, or just situations we find early growth companies end up in is they just get overwhelmed and then they need to hire someone. like that day. And they wait and they wait and they wait. And then they just need to hire. It's the short-sighted hiring. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm too busy to do this. So they sort of hire someone to do this, and they don't think through, well, is that a full-time role or a part-time role? Should it be an employee? Should it be a contractor? Is there anyone who would do that role? Is it going to be long-term? How much does that role cost? Oh, I can't afford it. So it becomes a chaotic decision-making scenario. So take the time very organically.
Next slide, Angie.
Thanks. You know, on the back of a napkin, ideally a spreadsheet at the very least, and think about it. Look at your pipeline, look at whatever you need to look at and say, okay, what am I going to need to do what? And are these real jobs? And how much do they cost? You know, and am I going to be able to afford them? And if you have a base like this, knowing what types of positions you will need down the road as you're building your company and your revenues are growing, you can refer to this list, and then you know the decisions you're making are going to be the right decisions. So we recommend you start with that. It's like a wish list. It's a hiring wish list. Build your company. And then take a look at it and figure out how much each position will cost. And we'll give you a bit of insight in how to do that. You don't have to be 100% accurate. And if you take a look at that, you'll start to see if you're going to need someone before you can afford them, or you're going to have tons of money to hire them. You're going to get creative. You can say, okay, well, I won't. So I'm going to have, this one's going to be part-time. I need a more senior resource to do this because I need this amount of knowledge for X. It allows you to sit and think about it in that perspective. It's very common for people for early growth to have a hybrid staff where you have employees and then you have some contractors, you have some senior consulting type positions as well. And it helps you create this bench where you don't have all of the employee liability on your company too early and putting too much a strain on your revenues that you have to bring in. Point is, figure out what you need, figure out how much it costs, and then figure out if you can afford it. And once you can answer those questions, you can start to get creative and put a plan in place. And then you can implement it. You can have a timeline in place. And I want this in 6 months. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 3 months, but at least when it comes to fruition, you know that what you're bringing, who and what you're bringing on board is exactly what you need. We have so many stories about, we just do. It's like I hired a contractor and then I made them an employee, but then I didn't need them to do that anymore. Like, it's just, I got so many of them, right? Or I hired a junior person, but then a senior person, but I really needed a junior person. I have someone and they quit 2 years later because they had no one to learn from, right? It's about smart planning and really thinking about what's your team going to look like. It may seem premature, but it's really important.
Great. I see Eddie's had their hand up for a while, so I'm not sure if you get a question you want to ask Eddie or if that's just from the earlier question, but if you want to ask, now's your chance. Okay. All right, we'll keep going. Oh, sorry, there is a question here. Do you know where we could find reliable information on salaries to estimate costs of hiring?
Yeah.
We're going to actually get to that, so hang tough. We got a whole slide on compensation. So the answer is yes.
Okay, to the next slide.
Yeah. This slide is in here because it's too much fun. CRA always wants to get their money. Let's be clear. They want your GST payment, your payroll taxes, and all the rest of it. If you are hiring, as Steph mentioned a minute ago, a hybrid kind of employment team with some employees, some contractors, some freelancers, some temps, etc., you want to make sure that you clearly delineate in Canada and in anywhere in Canada that you know exactly who's an employee and who's a contractor. And CRA has 7 tests that you should be aware of and that CRA would ask if somebody complained. For most startups, CRA is not even going to be aware, and they're not even really going to care if you've got 2 or 3 employees. The time that it becomes an issue is when you have an employee who is a contractor who you've treated like an employee and behaves like an employee, and then you have to let them go and they go and apply for EI. And then EI says, well, where's your record of employment, your employee, how many hours have you worked, et cetera. And they're like, oh, I don't know. And then they start asking questions, and now CRA is flagged you. And then they come poking around and ask questions. So you want to avoid that employee or that contractor creating problems from you. And so what I just want to review those 7 tests, and it's basically CRA starts by looking at the initial intent. Was your intention to hire them and have them behave like an employee, or was your intention to hire them and have them behave like a contractor? And a contractor usually has a beginning and an end date. And then they say things like, who controlled the work? Could the contractor just come and go and do their job and you didn't tell them task by task what to do? Could someone else from their organization do the work? So that's a big enough organization that they may have assistants or other consultants that can do it. Do they manage any of your people? Who provides the equipment? And that one's a touchy one because some companies are like, nah, we provide all the equipment. We keep our data secure. We keep our system secure. And so every question that CRA asks isn't going to be a delimiting factor. It's just part of the series of questions. They're going to ask if the contractor is incorporated. They're going to ask if there's an end date. And they're going to look at the contractor and see if the contractor has multiple revenue sources. If they only work for you, they show up in your office, they've been there a year, you've given them the equipment, you could be liable for all of the payroll deductions for the entire period of time that they worked for you, any penalties. And it's not just that you would have to pay the EI and CPP for the employer portion, you would also have to pay the EI and CPP for the employee portion. I did work for a company that got caught in this exact scenario, and the penalty was $50,000. So it's worth keeping this in mind as you get employees. I see some questions. I see a whole bunch of questions. There's a whole.
One quick thing to add, and then we'll go to questions. It's one thing, just how you can manage this. If you think about it, if you've got project-based work coming through your organization, it's much easier. So it's common to put a contractor on a master services agreement for a year with an end date. And then how you keep yourself, this person, even if they're doing similar tasks to people you have as employees, is you do a statement of work for every project they roll onto and roll off, which is just one piece of paper. It's not administratively heavy, but what you're showing is that you don't have any long-term vision into how long you can have this person on board. And that is the most helpful thing, along with them being incorporated, is the best way. We deal with this all the time, and that is our suggestion on how to manage it, provided they shouldn't be an employee.
And the government gets around this themselves by being masters at this whole game. They hire most of their employees on a 3-month contract, and they roll it over 3 times, and then they give them a break of 3 months, and then they start it all over again. So they're the worst.
Yeah. There's total solutions for this, because having contractors and employees is a beautiful way to run a company. So it's possible.
All right, Liz, what do we got going over there?
Okay, questions. There's one's related to CRA, so I'll start with that. How can we make sure that the company and the employees are correctly registered in the CRA system? I don't think there is a CRA system per se, right?
Yeah, you've got your My Account.
Yeah.
You would go and set up My Account in CRA with the CRA on the CRA site, and it typically wants your personal login. So if you've done taxes, you've got a personal login, and then you set up under you a business account, and under that business account you would set up your GST, your business. Well, you've got a business number. Go wherever.
You just log in through the business CRA. You can bypass your personal and go through your business.
Yeah. Once you've got it set up. Exactly. But if you registered for your business number, then wherever you access that, then you go and set up your GST and your payroll number. If you haven't registered for a business number yet, then go to the CRA site and just ask in the search, I want to set up a business number, and then that'll get you started.
Okay. Tim's question is, in your experience, how often do small startups get in trouble over Employment Standards Act issues? Ooh. Fun question.
Often. If we're talking all employment standards, a lot of people run lean. They run without HR for years. we get people that are the 35 plus employees. It's not like you need an HR person on site, but unless you are an HR person, you're most likely making decisions that aren't terribly legally sound just by accident. So we do get that. It can be from terminating the person in the wrong way to not having enough actual HR admin to protect yourself and your employees should any incident happen. So if it's all of employment standards, as far as the CRA is concerned about contractors, as Allison kind of mentioned in the beginning, you're not really on someone's radar until you're either big enough or someone says the wrong thing. Like a really good example, we had a client, they had 27 contractors. They're a full contract company. And they hit a point a little bit later than they should have, which was fine. It worked out fine, but we had to do a full employee, like we had to convert everybody into employee status because the reality was none of them were truly contractors anymore. So it gets messier when you to do it later in life, later in your company life than to do, so try to convert your contractors to employees when it makes sense. But early growth, what do you think, Allison? Like, I don't think
I think that the answer to your question is not that much. But as Steph said, is with CRA, it's not like nobody's likely to get into trouble until somebody complains. And so in my experience, I haven't had employment standards complaints very often at any of the companies I've worked at. But boy, when you get one, it is a time and money suck that you want to avoid. So you could get issues within your recruitment practices, within your payroll practices. If you're cranky and misbehaving, then you're going to get bullying and harassment claims, and that's going to raise flags. So the reality is, if you're a good, honest employer who treats your employees well, and you make a mistake on your payroll or something, you're going to get past it and you're not going to have a problem. But if you're not, and if you're demanding and you make people work overtime and don't pay them, employees in general understand the rules. And if you start breaking the rules, then you're going to get complaints. So where we see more complaints in small companies is when employers intentionally break the rules. They demand people to work longer hours than they should. They don't pay them minimum wage. They don't pay them overtime. They don't pay for their equipment. They don't give them the right training. The safety issues are there. So
or they change their job, or they change how they pay them or what they pay them, or they just kind of do whatever they want. And so sometimes it's not even on purpose. Like, I think to Allison's point, it comes with pretty poor intent or entitlement, but on the other side, it's just complete ignorance.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It could be that.
Okay, one last question for now. At what stage of startup growth does it make sense to outsource payroll administration?
Depends on your entire patience. If you can't add a number accurately and can't use a spreadsheet, do it immediately. If you're okay with handling your own payroll, or you've got an accountant who does it, if you've got an accountant who's competent at it, you can go for a long time. Intuit, QuickBooks has a payroll function on it. And if your accountant is using QuickBooks, you can go for up to 50 employees. But it just depends on whether you start running into problems, or when it becomes a headache, or when it takes up too much of your time. And then, can you afford it? If you can't afford it, you're doing it manually for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot too. Like, to Allison's, but there's a lot more choice now. It's not just ADP, right? Like WagePoint and that make it a lot more affordable. The good part about using some sort of assistance to do it is the rules are generally built into it. So it catches you before, so what you don't know about payroll law, it helps you. So it's that guidance that I think is most important, by having some technological help to it. I mean, in most HR systems have it built in, have something like Humi has it and Bamboo has it. And so even if you're doing it yourself, using the help of HR, of some sort of payroll technology will even be better if you can't fully outsource it. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, one more question came through from a couple of people, both around overtime, now that we've been talking about the Employment Standards Act. So lots of employees work long hours for startups. So how do startups usually pay overtime for these employees? And on the flip side, how does the Employment Standards Act protect employees from unpaid overtime work?
It depends entirely on your industry. So if you're tech, employees are exempt from overtime rules under employment standards, but they typically, I guess the employment standard sets out the guidelines. So if you exceed 40 hours per week, if you're on a 5-day a week, 8 hours a day, then you pay overtime. And you pay overtime if you exceed 8 hours in the day, but you could go with a 4x10, 4 days a week times 10 hours. And then the rules balance out. You don't pay overtime after 10.
With an app, but you put an agreement in place if you're going to switch it.
So it's, if you're a startup and people are working long hours, most startups provide, most startups, and I'm going to presume for your group, most startups are professional environments. And so small companies provide flexibility and say, if you're going to put in a whole bunch of long hours and you're working until midnight to meet this deadline, then sleep in and don't come in till noon tomorrow, or I'm going to give you a day off in lieu. And they create a balance that everybody feels is equitable. Where you run into trouble is when you stop being fair and employees start to get cranky. And when employees get cranky, then they start looking at the rules and then they start pushing back. So balance what you need with what your employees need. And if you need them to work some extra hours, buy them dinner or make sure they've got a taxi ride home or a safe way to get home. Just work with them and balance it out. But most people are pretty reasonable in a startup. They're there because you've given them some shares possibly, or they like the small environment because it is flexible. So it becomes a bit of a give and take, but the rules are there. It's, if you exceed 8 hours a day, if you're not exempt, then you got to pay.
Yeah. And even if you keep them happy and they don't come for it, great, but they can come at any point. And often upon an exit, we've seen many times, angry employees hand over a piece of paper that says, here's all the days that I worked overtime that you didn't give me either a day off in lieu, I was not compensated for it. And as an employer, unless you can prove that they did not work overtime on those days, right, then you will be on the hook for it. Okay. So to Allison's point, figure out a system that works. It's not in spite of, it doesn't replace it, but it's in hopes that that equitable feeling is there. And as long as you're reasonable and not taking advantage of something, that is also what they look at. Does it happen all the time? That's another big indicator. If it's happening consistently, then you've got a problem. And one thing I would say about overtime, everyone should have an overtime policy. And in that policy, it must state nobody's allowed to work overtime without permission. That's your protection. All right. And that's where you've approved it versus someone coming to you, hey, I worked overtime all these times. And you'd be like, I didn't tell you to do that. Right. So that's your preventative. So we've got a bunch of information on it, but you have to pay overtime if your employees work overtime unless you have agreed upon something else that's equitable, reasonable, and fair. And
in a small company or startup, a sure way to avoid it is hire a contractor and put them on I'm going to pay you to deliver X. And you don't care how long it takes them to deliver X. You're going to pay them for X. And then they're a contractor. And if it takes them 5 times longer than you thought or they thought, well, they agreed to that amount of money. And so that avoids you from paying overtime if you use a contractor. And if you're finding there's a lot of overtime and you don't see an end in sight, then you've got a workforce planning problem because nobody stays. They just don't. It's not fair. It's not the way to go, right? So it has to have some ebb and flow to it, and it has to have some logical business reasons for it versus I'm a struggling startup and I don't have enough money coming in, so we're all just gonna wreck our lives over it. Like that doesn't work either. You got to find that middle ground between that. The generation of workers that are coming up are going to be really clear with you that they're not going to put up with it. They're not going to do it. So there's that. Yeah. That's a different slide. It is not included in this presentation.
All right, there are a couple more questions, but let's go through a bit more content because I think they might get answered, and then we'll circle back to more questions in a bit.
Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
This mine or yours?
I'll start it. So we'll circle back. It was like the workforce planning. How much will it cost? And I believe someone asked this question. And so long are the days of the paying the $2,500 for the salary surveys that are 18 months out of date. So there's two ways to do this, and you need both. There's a lot of different ways online that you can do your research. It can be as organic as Googling, software developer, iOS, Toronto, or right. And there's a bunch of sites that come up that you'll see that are reputable. Like, I'm not going to list them all. You can get a PayScale and Glassdoor, and there's way more of them now. I think I use 4 or 5 every time I do a comp survey. You can get it down to the province. You can do it for the country. They give you ranges, etc. And what you'll find is, as much as they are all flawed in the way they collect this data, when you use multiples, it's within all that sort of, it's in that safety of numbers. You start to see them trend and start to match each other in certain places. So you can feel pretty confident about that level of research, because you've got it coming from many different sources and you're seeing a pattern that's of accuracy. And then the second side of it is, so you can get close, but where you're really going to get the data from is when you start talking to people. Right. When someone comes in and you have a candidate, and you say, listen, like, what are you looking for? Right. It's not you dictating it at this point. And it's that information they give you is going to really tell you what the market value is. And you'll start to see trends from the people that you talk to. So from what people are telling you they expect to make to do that job, and what you see other companies paying, you'll be able to find something in the middle. And from there, it'll be either great, I can afford it, or I can't afford it. And that's when you get creative in your compensation package. And I'll hand it to Allison for creative compensation.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add to Steph's point, and to answer the question that came in earlier. Steph gave you the best answer. It's Google it. There are lots of salary sites out there. There's salarysurvey.com, there's PayScale, there's talent.com. Indeed is posting more and more jobs with the salary range in it. So go to the job boards and see if you can see similar jobs and what the pay range is based on your location. If you're doing hires from a particular industry, engineers, you can go to the Engineering Society for the province and get the salary ranges for them. The Law Society posts standard salaries. HR posts standard salaries. So if you've got a particular industry or type of person you're hiring, they may have an industry organization that will have salary information. And if you are hiring from that group, you might pay for that, but it should be reasonably accurate. For admin and finance people, I download the Randstad and Hayes and one of the other recruiting firms. They post salary surveys every year. So to Steph's point, you don't take just one point of reference. You take a bunch, take a look at it, figure out if you can afford the range. And then from there, go to your interviews and see if that's even more accurate, if that's accurate. And then if you can pay it and you just want to pay salary, then you're golden. If you can't afford it, and in this market today where salaries are moving by the week, you got to get a bit creative. And we do things like, what are your perks? Is it flexible? Do you have free parking? Do you have pay for transit costs? Do you pay for an Evo or an Uber? Do you provide coffee, tea? What are your perks? What makes it appealing? And keep in mind that it's not just the perks that people are looking for. They're looking for a great culture. That's really a move that we've been seeing. So what are you offering people from a learning perspective, for your support of their growth personally and professionally? I'm seeing way more wellness programs out there as perks, yoga and mental health support, and what's some of the other treatment for various things that people are struggling with are becoming more and more common in the packages, but they're less of a cost to the organization. Vacation is an interesting one. I mean, employment standards sets the rules. We're seeing, 5 years ago, we saw, everybody wanted to do unlimited vacation. We're not seeing that as much anymore. What we're starting to see more about is the 4x10 work week, and then having that Friday off, or flexing time off so that in the summertime, you always have Fridays off. So you get a long weekend every summer. So And benefits. For a startup, benefits are expensive, not compared to the US, but you're going to be paying $3,000 to $6,000 per employee for a reasonable benefits package. If you can't afford that, then go with what we call a health spending account, where you allocate $2,000 per employee per year to spend on whatever they want for their own health and well-being. And so the point of this is that look at what the base salary might be, do your homework, Google it, get information through your interview process, talk to your own employees, pay equitably. Don't get into the, oh, I like him better than her, I'm going to pay her more. Be equitable or you will get yourselves into trouble. And then look at what you can do to supplement the base pay that you've got. And obviously, we haven't even listed it here. The compensation package, because you're a startup, may include options. And then get your lawyer involved to get you appropriate option agreements and understand your option pool and how to do that.
Yeah, people, it's interesting. You know, you can plan ahead, but until you start talking to people, it's amazing the array of things that they actually are, that is important to them and that you can absolutely put together. So it's this massive package of opportunity compared to what it used to be years ago. So don't think that you can't, that you don't have something to offer because your salary is not as high. We've seen people come in, take a $40,000 pay cut for an opportunity they think is great. Like, don't make that assumption. If you've got something great going on, and well, it's a great lead in here because we're heading into recruitment, and you're going to see Allison go on in a great way about this, which is like, if you can sell this, it's amazing, you know, and be creative on compensation, you're gonna do fine.
So recruiting in this world right now, recruiting is, you know, it's almost a 4-letter word. It is part art, part science, and it's all about knowing what to look for. Next slide. So in a startup, this is our go-to advice when recruiting in a startup. You're not likely to find exactly the right person, because in a startup, people need to wear multiple hats. Somebody's going to be doing coding one day, QA the next, writing requirements the next, writing a grant proposal the next. Like, you need to look for people who, at this point, when you're starting up, who are smart and adaptable and fit your culture. They'll learn, they will figure it out. But you can't teach initiative. You can't teach the courtesy or attention to detail that you might need based on the job that you've got. So right now, don't try and fit somebody's resume to the job description that you've got. You're never going to find them, because the Microsofts and the Amazons out there are hiring them like crazy. But if you find someone who wants a smaller environment, doesn't want the grind of a big company, or doesn't want to be a cog in the wheel, then start talking to them about, what do you like to do? And can you multitask? And, you know, in a startup, unless you've got somebody working in data science and you need them to focus on one thing all day long, don't hire people that need to focus on one thing all day long. Hire people who can move and think and talk to your customer and then go and talk to the tech team or whatever. But look for smart people. I can't emphasize that enough, particularly in this market.
Agreed. And you want that person to be saying why. Like, so you come out there with all your amazing ideas, and they're like, oh, hang on. You want people to bring you ideas. You want people who are innovative. You want people to help you get from where you are now to where you want to be. So definitely look for that.
Next slide. So I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. I'm happy to answer questions as we go, but you've all done pitches for investment, or you've had to have a business plan prepared, and recruiting is selling. So prepare your recruiting pitch, you know, talk about your company, why it's interesting, what might appeal to them. Align your messaging for your candidates that you're talking to with whatever marketing that you're doing. Be prepared, know what you're going to say. Can you rattle off your mission statement, your values? And can you talk about your culture and your environment and what you're offering? And it's sharing those things to let the candidate know that whatever they're shopping for or interested in, you can share with them. And then ask, what are you looking for? And because right now in the market, it's a buyer's market. It's a candidate market. And then just see if you can meet what they want. Next slide. Finding talent. So there's the post and pray method, which interestingly enough, lots of companies diss the whole post and pray concept. But you know what? We get lots of people out there who have never heard of a startup applying to a startup because they saw it on Indeed. So don't discount the free job boards that you can use. And Indeed, while it charges, and I wouldn't recommend in a startup that you pay, you can post on Indeed and not, what's it called, Steph? Not have,
Not anymore. Sorry, not remember that just changed, but this is just a recent change this quarter, but you can pay minimally is your point, like $5 a day kind of thing up for a week. Like you can really control your budget. There are a few free job boards out there. They're kind of disappearing to this new model, but nonetheless, your cost would be very small. And your point remains the same. Use those. Don't go and pay $700 for a posting on LinkedIn before you try the $5 a day method.
Headhunting is time consuming and super low success. So I spent 15 years as a recruiter and I did headhunt, but it's hard work and you probably don't have time to headhunt. But as an owner of a small business, you should always be recruiting. You should be always listening to what other startups not doing so well might be shedding some employees. You should be talking to other CEOs, and you should be always keeping in mind who you might need based on Steph's comment earlier. What's your workforce plan? If you don't need somebody for 6 months, but you meet them in 3 months, you may want to hire them because you may not find them again. You could hire an agency or a recruiter. Really hard to find a recruiter who's willing to work on an hourly basis right now, or even on a contingency fee right now. Recruiters are like hen's teeth right now. Agencies will charge you 20 to 25% to do a search, unless it's admin, and then it's a bit lower, might be 12 to 15%. But right now in a startup, use your network. And Steph and I love hiring out of the university environments. So the BCITs, even the Langeras and the VCCs, UBC, SFU, use their co-op programs, go out and talk to students, talk to profs within the discipline that is relevant to you and see who's up and coming. Because back to my earlier slide, hire smart and adaptable. And students are already in that phase of learning and being sponges and working hard. So I can't emphasize enough how successful that can be.
I'm going to interrupt here. We have a question. I can see it. So I'm just going to, and it's someone's asking, here we are to everyone. Sorry. How about international hiring? Are those employees, are those employees, are they counted as contractors? So we answer a fair amount of international recruiting questions. And so I'm going to say it depends, but generally yes. But all the laws in regards to hiring contractors out of the States or other countries around the world, it's all unique to your situation. So if you have one and you want to hire internationally, send us the details and we'll tell you what you need to do. It's not a blanket answer, but generally it's a contractor relationship, unless you have a business entity set up in that country, generally speaking.
Oh yeah, it's a complicated answer. Right? If they've come in with a work permit, you could hire them as a temporary employee. You could hire them as a contractor. If they're coming to you incorporated from another country, then you could work with them. If you're hiring them remotely, so hiring somebody in Eastern Europe to do development for you, or India or China, you can do that. You can offshore a lot of work. You just lose control of the hours that they're spending and the quality of the work until it shows up, and then you have to pay for it. So Steph, that's a whole other question.
Or you figure out how to do it successfully, and learning to manage a remote workforce is a whole other thing, all of which is completely doable. You have to do it properly. So if you have something specific, send it to us and we'll be happy to answer your exact scenario, because they're not all the same.
Yeah. Typically, if you're hiring offshore, you're going to hire a few people, and they're typically contractors, and you're paying them out of country. Typically.
Safer for many reasons.
Definitely safer.
Okay, next slide.
This one's an interesting one. Recruitment is, as I said at the very beginning, it's part art, part science. So the science is have your job description clear, post, get out there, put it out as broad a shotgun approach as you can. But then when you're ready to hire, keep in mind that the candidate decision is 80% gut. and 20% logic. People are influenced about how they feel about whoever is interviewing them. So if it's you, they're going to be, do I like this guy? Do I like the feel? So keep in mind that you're selling and appeal to what motivates them if you like them. And more so, and I find it interesting that I still keep getting this question. If you like someone in an interview and you're the owner or you've got the authority to hire, tell them you like them. Like, there's no secret here. Like, be honest. Like, I like you. I think you're a great fit. I'm going to have you back to do a technical test, or I'd like you to meet my business partner because I think you're great. So give them those warm fuzzies that you like them. If you don't like them, if you're good at communication, you can say, thanks very much, but this isn't really a great fit for you because of A, B, and C, or you can just say, thanks very much, we'll let you know. For the candidates you like, don't overpromise, just be honest, because if you overpromise and they discover it, they're going to be angry and they're going to walk away. If you can't afford them, or if something just isn't going to work, don't be afraid to walk away. There will always be another candidate. As much as this market is tough, there are still people looking for jobs. Once you do find somebody you like, please put it in writing. Contracts make things solid. It puts everybody on the same page about how you're going to terminate or what you're going to pay and what vacation is and all that good stuff. So always put an offer in writing, and hopefully you don't ever have to rescind one.
Exactly.
If they sign, celebrate it. Take them for lunch, a drink, make sure you welcome them, get all excited. Don't just sign and run away and try and hire 10 more people. Like, you've got to get into that honeymoon phase. So if they sign, celebrate it and follow up with them and start talking to them about how you're going to bring them on board.
Totally. Next slide. Oh, look at you. Welcome to the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, nice transition.
And that's it. And to Allison's point, like, we're not hiring numbers here. We're hiring people. So onboarding is a critical component, and it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Can we hit the next slide? There we go. So you need onboarding. Yes, you do. Right. And I mean, early growth companies, you show up, and how many times, there's no laptop or no phone, or there's no one really there, and no one said where the bathroom was. And, it's sort of like, okay, we got like 700 things to do. Okay. Like, it's not like people can't be thrown into the fire and they're not willing, but the reality is, if you want them to come and get productive, then onboarding is important. Not only the first impression part of it, which is critical. Like, they thought they liked you, you show up, it doesn't even look like you're expecting them. They're going to remember that first impression. And if they don't know how to do something, they don't know how to log in, they don't have something to log into, they don't know who to learn from, they don't know where the training materials are, then they're just going to sit there and they just cost you money, and it takes them longer to get productive. So that's the purpose of onboarding, right? It's how you make them feel and how fast you get them productive. And what do people need to know? Allison, Allison, more than you think. And it's true. Like, some people, not all people, but a lot of people need to feel comfortable. Like, it's sort of a joke, like they don't know where the bathroom is, but it kind of is important. Like, where do they park their bike? Like, do people take lunch at noon, or is it like 1 o'clock acceptable? Like, can I eat at my desk? Like, all these little things that are very cultural, people get concerned about. They don't know what the normal is. So hey, this is where I normally go down the street to get lunch, or, hey, generally this is how people do this. It makes people feel comfortable, so they're not going to do something that makes them feel out of place. So that's also where having as small or employee manual in place, or a handbook, which we've put many together and we have templates for, because it tells people this information, not only how to request something like vacation and all these things they really need to know how to do, but even the softer stuff, like how to log in and where to find files and all those sort of things. So yes, they need to know all this stuff. Make them as comfortable as like you're hosting an Airbnb. Like, this stuff matters. Okay. And
if you don't have time, sorry, Steph, I'm interrupting.
Yeah, no,
you.
it's fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
You as the CEO don't have time, and you've got at least one other employee, then divide and conquer. You'll take on the overview of the company and what your vision is and how the product works, and then have your other employee talk to them about where to go for lunch, where to park your bike, here's the bathroom, here's the kitchen, here are the kitchen rolls. Like, the more people involved in the onboarding, the quicker everybody's going to get to know everybody, and the less work for any one individual. But at minimum, you can get a buddy. And give them a buddy to help them with those early questions that they don't want to keep bugging the CEO for. And I think I saw something recent hire, write something down. I've done startup little booklets or pages for every employee. And then I've had the next employee add to it to, what information did you need that you didn't have that we didn't give you? And they just keep adding to it until you've got something that is super useful for new hires. I didn't quite.
Yeah, that's what Tim's saying here, which is amazing. Yeah, he gets new hires to write everything down they want to know, and they use that to help continually craft the onboarding manual for the next people. Brilliant, like well done. And it'll grow and become even better and better and better. But it's important, and how they feel gets more productive. And there's some ridiculous statistic, and who knows how accurate it is now, but I guess it's probably even worse. But it was something like over 70% of new hires in the first 3 months are still looking. Like, talk about a commitment, right? So if you could, am I right?
Yeah.
Sorry, did I mess it up, or is that correct?
You're correct. They're still getting pings from job boards, from recruiters and friends that, who knows what's going on in that first 30 days. So it is the honeymoon phase, and don't mess it up.
Don't.
One other thing about onboarding is, I think it was Tim, be organized, like have a plan of like, what am I going to tell people about what's our product, what's our mission? Like have a checklist of who's going to tell them this and who's going to tell them that. And if you look organized and look like you care, as Stephanie said, if someone thinks you like them and then they show up and there's no computer and everybody's like, oh, you're here. It doesn't bode well for staying long-term.
No, they leave. And shocking, we have an onboarding checklist. So that's really robust. So if you don't want to think about it, ask us, we'll send you one. All right, next slide.
And we don't need to do the next slide.
No, we don't. We're already there.
We talked about it.
And we talked about the playbook, and it's essential. You know what, as you start to hire, whether you have it in place, whether it's 3 pages, 5 pages, but you know what, for the same reason we just mentioned, it's important legally, it's important for an employee experience, and it grows in the same way that, Tim beautifully talked about the onboarding policy, but to have something in writing so people know how to do things and what the process is, and for you to know what the process is, so things are done and expectations are managed, it's great. So think about that, kind of like workforce planning, your employee playbook. These are things to have on the ground. It's your foundation for your people. If you don't have one, you don't know what needs to be in it, just let us know. Happy to help, but it's important.
Yeah, and it'll grow with you. It can start small. It doesn't have to be monumental. It can start small and then evolve.
Yeah, exactly.
Next
All right. I think
we talked about this one.
Yeah, I think we're okay on this.
Yep.
We talked about the working from home.
Yeah, so this is in the onboarding. This is where you would get into, what is your work from home policy if you apply it. So yeah, we did talk about it. All right. Okay, honeymoon's over.
Yeah, see you later.
What happened? We don't know what happened.
Someone's quitting. Yeah, go ahead if you want.
So terminations come in 2 flavors. Either your employees quit for whatever reason, or you fire them. In HR talk, if they quit, that's that's a voluntary termination, or if you fire them, that's involuntary. If you fire them, there was probably a reason, hopefully not because you've run out of money, but something didn't work out. But if they quit, that's a problem for you because that's usually unexpected and a hit. And so you really want to avoid people leaving voluntarily or understand why they did. For terminations, if you're going to actually have to do a termination, this is where you run into some legal problems if you do it wrong. So be careful, do them right. And never, ever do them alone. You never want to get into a situation where someone says, they did this to me in the termination meeting, and you have nothing but a he said, she said, and you have no recording or you have no documentation. So if you're going to do a termination, always have somebody else present in addition to your employee that you're letting go, because that is your biggest risk. You generally don't need a lawyer to do a termination if you follow employment standards and give people appropriate notice. And as we always say to people, treat people with dignity, kindness, and respect. But you would need a lawyer if you start to not follow employment standards, or you can't, or there's some sense of potentially a human rights issue coming into play. For example, in a small company, if you've got somebody with a medical issue, and they haven't been able to come to work for 6 months, and you don't have an appropriate sick policy, and you've been either paying them and now you don't know what to do, but they can't work. There's accommodation. And that's when you need somebody like us who can help you, or a lawyer, to determine whether or not you can get out of this relationship. But that's when things get messy.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. The thing with, I think it's always check, unless it's really cut and dry. I think you should always check with some level of an HR professional before you terminate something, because the reality is sometimes you don't even see that you've got a bit of a legal risk to it, right? And so just make sure that you're just not off the cuff ever. Like, this seems logical, because the law isn't logical. Like, I have to say, we have a whole thing around it, but you know, even if you treat people beautifully with dignity, kindness, and respect, you still have to be right. You still have to be able to fire them, and fire them properly.
And what we often say to people is, think about how you would want to be treated if you were being fired. And if you do it right, this should be your goal. You should strive to have them shake your hand at the elevator and say, thank you very much for firing them. And you can do that. It's possible. We do it all the time. You have a conversation, this job isn't working out. What could work out? Well, we don't have that job. How do we exit you out nicely? And make everybody feel good. Again, because this is a tough talent market, if you don't do it well, people talk, and your other employees see that. And the next thing you know, 3 people have left, and you're going to have a tough time finding a replacement for them. So treat people with dignity, kindness, respect. If it comes to having to let them go, have a conversation, give them a heads up, treat them well. And usually people will walk out the door with reasonable notice, and you're good.
Exactly.
So, but
It's
if
a
you
conversation. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's right. You just said something really great there. It's a conversation. It's not a meeting. Unless something's, hey, you know what? You end up sometimes with employees, and your spidey sense is there, and you're thinking that it's going to go badly. Then yeah, you're a little more formal about things and a lot more careful about it. But for most people, where you know everything's okay, it's just not working for whatever reason. It's a conversation. It's not a meeting. It's just an honest conversation where you come together. It's not necessarily I'm offering you this. It's, what do you need? How do we get this from point A to point B where it works for both of us? Have that conversation, right? It's, you know,
80% of the time it'll be exactly that. 20% of the time it might get messy, and you got to walk them out the door. But you
try
want
that.
having to march them out the door with a security
Don't,
guard.
yeah, don't take a good person and put them in an office and send them a letter across the table. Like, just don't do that anymore. It was so 30 years ago. It doesn't work, right? Like, so anyways, that's our thoughts on termination. And I think that ends it.
It
We can
does.
take questions.
19 questions, and I think we've got 15 minutes. We should be okay.
Yes, and we still have some questions to answer. Although I just know someone who was terminated with the letter across the table, so it's still happening.
Oh, yeah. We're just trying to change it.
All right. Okay. So let's just go through some questions we've got here. So if a startup cannot afford the CR, okay, so I'm going to start with this one, then I'll switch back to that one. If we haven't paid to WorkSafe BC until now, will they accept us from now on, or will they give us a penalty?
Say that again.
If we haven't paid to WorkSafe BC till now.
So maybe they're not registered with WorkSafe.
Oh, they haven't registered for their WC.
Yeah.
Previously.
Yeah.
Is there a penalty? Sorry, Allison, say that again.
Just go register. If they ask you for your history, they might, but just go register and start your payroll now. And you should be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of penalties coming from that perspective.
Yeah, they're usually just happy that you're registered.
Yeah. It's more about liability.
Yeah, okay, this one might be different. So if a startup cannot afford the CRA penalty, if there's a CRA fee, will the CRA chase down the startup to pay the penalty personally?
They don't take no from anybody. They will. And as a founder or an owner of a startup, Steph's stopping me.
I'm saying, well, it red flags it for me a little bit, because it depends on how you're incorporated, right? It depends how personally protected you are from your organization, right? So that's the real answer to it, and how arm's length you can be. But even still, generally, with that incorporation and you're protected, we all know there's still some personal risk, but I think you'd be quite protected because you're incorporated. If you're not incorporated, you got a bigger problem, but yeah.
The CRA will make every attempt to go after the founders.
Yes.
In a termination scenario, I've had founders who ran out of money and had to fire everybody, but they didn't have enough money to pay the notice and employment standards. Well, legally, they ended up getting sued, but the lawyers went after the founders for their personal revenues. So be very careful.
All right. Another question from Ellie. How do you manage time for a sales employee on the road?
You trust them.
Yeah, sales is very performance driven. At the end of the day, you're looking for results and not counting hours, right? I actually think this is with all positions, unless they're paid like it's at the end of the day, if someone working for you and they're stepping up and they're doing well and they did it in 6 hours instead of 8, does it right? So
yeah, and if they're a salesperson and they're going to a trade show and they're working a whole whack of hours over a weekend, then you kind of say, hey, take a couple days off. But generally, if you're trying to manage their work, I would say trust them. And as Steph said, look for the results. Are they selling? Are the customers happy? Just look at the results.
Yeah, are you making money? How are they feeling? Do they feel overworked, underworked? And because things like, how do you manage time? How do you, I don't think someone's working when they're working from home or this or that. It's like, listen, or people on unlimited vacation. It's not about the policy. It's like, if something's not working, it's a performance problem from the person. It's not a policy problem, right? Anytime somebody's not performing, doesn't matter. You can blame sickness, you can blame vacation, you can blame they're not working enough hours. It doesn't matter what it is. It's still a performance problem. It doesn't mean your policies are wrong. It just means there's a problem. So if this person's doing great, but there might be a reason you're asking, there might be an actual byproduct of why hours have become a thing.
All right, I've got one more question here I'll ask. This is your last call for questions if anyone else wants to get some in. So this one's kind of a scenario. We are an education marketplace and enter into contracts with most instructors. What are some of the general do's and don'ts that we should take into account?
I'm going to presume you have a beginning and an end date for a sessional instructor. And I would just have it in writing and have it standard. Provide your start date, end date. I'd have a clear description of duties and responsibilities regarding their hours and their work and what you provide to support them from an educational perspective. Do you provide the video equipment? Do they have to work from home? But do's and don'ts are pretty consistent overall. It's have a conversation, find out what they need, make sure it's in line with what you can provide, and then document it.
Right. And generally too, it's expectation, Allison's point. It's like, okay, you're going to teach this course. Is it reoccurring? Is it not reoccurring? Are they engaged in multiple ways? That's a pretty, it sounds, just without knowing too much, pretty safe, because they're coming in to do one specific thing. But if they're, so if they start to tick the other boxes where all they do is work for you 40 hours a week, then it could become more cloudy. But if they're just, it can be very at will sometimes, right? So you may have a roster, and an example of this is you have 35 people you engage, but never consistently, depending on what needs to be taught or what comes in from a demand perspective. And you never promising exactly when that's going to be. They're just sort of a bench of contractors you use when your business needs them. Then that's also very safe.
Yeah, it's expectations. What do you provide? What do you not provide? What do you expect them to provide? How do you support them to do the job?
And what do you probably, yeah. And we can look at your situation a lot more with a finer lens when we understand more. But from my initial thought of that seems very sort of ad hoc, which is even like there could be inconsistencies, which is a good thing, right?
Okay, there's just a general question from people on how they could get access to all the templates you have mentioned.
No, sure. Yeah, so if you go to our website, which is answerbar.com, you sign up right at the corner. You can ask us. It doesn't cost you anything. You just log in with your email. It'll prompt you you can ask us for whatever templates you want, and we'll send them through the system to you. I believe you can ask 2 questions that free of charge.
We need you to log up just from a legal perspective of sending you our documents.
Right.
We will not spam you with sales calls and all the rest of it. We're just from a legal perspective and sending you stuff. We need to have who you are, that you're real. So just log in and then say, hey, give us an example of the templates you want, and we've got probably a list from here that we could just send you, but we have hundreds, so we're not going to send you the entire library. That's not going to work. But if you give us a sense of whether you're looking for an employment contract or onboarding documents or just general checklists, just let us know and we'll send them through to you.
Okay, so answerbar.com. I've used many of their templates and adapted many of them, and they're very useful, and I can vouch for them that you won't get spammed. So it's all helpful. Okay, there's one last question, which I think is kind of around more on the overtime issue. So in general, the workforce world is you answer emails on weekends, you work longer hours than your contract. How come that's acceptable?
How come it's acceptable?
Ellen here is saying how come it's acceptable in big companies but not in startups. I think related to the overtime conversation, but
depends on who you are too. Like, are you a manager? Like, it really depends on, like, do you mean like there's a fair amount of people exempt from overtime as well that wasn't covered. Certain parts of the tech sector, entertainment, and I think our managers exempt as well. Managers are exempt, and there's a way to define what a manager is. It's not by title alone. Okay, so it's not quite as cut and dry as that. You can't call someone a manager and then they don't have overtime. It's more complicated than that. So
they're exempt. But to your point, I think larger companies have evolved through a generation of expectations that you work as hard as you need to get your job done, and I don't care how long it takes you. And so there's a culture within some larger companies that still have that expectation that you will check emails on weekends or after hours and respond. What we're finding is that is evolving and changing, and employees are putting their foot down and saying, we need to turn off our phones and turn off our email when we go home. And that whole movement of dividing work from downtime is becoming more and more of a concept that people are embracing, and organizations are respecting that. And so it comes down to a little bit of respect, and it also comes down to what the managers are expecting, and are you getting your job done in the time frame that is reasonable, or you're not, and are you putting in those extra hours because you need to get your job done? And it's a tough fine line, but Steph and I are seeing way more people saying, I put my phone down at 5 o'clock and I don't pick it up again until 8 o'clock. And companies are accepting that now.
But it is expectations, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to overwork somebody, eventually they're going to leave, or they're not happy, so they're not doing as good a job as they can. But when you kind of understand why you needed to answer that email on a Saturday, and it's not every Saturday, or this or that, because you have an important job, like stuff is happening, you're generally okay with that if there's some give and take where you do feel that you do get adequate downtime, even though you do work some weekends and you do work that. And it's kind of like what we talked about before, it's that balance. But if you don't have strong communication between your organization, your managers and your employees actually talking and making sure that people don't feel that they're being cheated, or no one's asking the question, why do you have to work so much overtime? Your job shouldn't have that much overtime. We need to do something about this, like hire more people. That's just crappy management, right? And then eventually people leave crappy managers, right? So when you are setting up your organization, you may see this happening in other places, and you may be able to manage people working more hours than you would hope that they needed to work by having that conversation, and they know they get stuff in return for that. You start talking to them and they start just feeling crappy and not feeling appreciated and feeling overworked and not feeling heard, they're going to leave. They just always do.
All right.
And employees can do that. They can walk these days and go find another job.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, seems like a sad note to end things on, but thanks very much. for all the super open answers, examples, really great walkthrough, everything HR related. So thanks again, Steph and Allison. So again, if you want any of those templates that are mentioned or have a couple questions, answerbar.com is how you get in touch with Allison and Steph. Otherwise, next week we are talking raising financing, always a very popular topic with startups. So please join us along with Keith Iffel from Spring, who will walk you through the entire ins and outs of raising money for your company. All right.
He's amazing.
Yeah, no, I'll always look forward to that one. So thank you again, Allison and Steph, and Answer Bar. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks again. Bye.